The film begins with a man, a forest dweller, who discovers his dog has died from a mysterious disease, and he is sprayed with its infected blood. 5 friends, namely Paul, Karen, Bert, Jeff, and Marcy, have rented a cabin in the same forest for their week-long vacation. The group stops to buy supplies at a store. Unexpectedly, Dennis, the intellectually disabled son of the store manager, suddenly bites Paul's hand, causing a wound that greatly angers the store manager, Tommy. Even though Tommy, who is temperamental towards newcomers, tells him to wash the wound at the back store faucet. A man, a friend of Tommy's, briefly chats with the group and warns them to be cautious, as a bacterial infection is rampant in the area. However, before they can get more information, they are abruptly driven away by Tommy because Bert stole a snack. Shortly after, they reach their cabin. Some are very excited about it, though they are upset about the lack of GPS signal and more. Meanwhile, Jeff and Marcy immediately engage in ritual, while Paul is nearly shot by Bert, who then becomes very angry with him. Subsequently, Paul goes to find Karen, who is upset because she cannot find a cell signal. Then she strips off her clothes and invites Paul to swim and have fun with her, and then they make love on the dock. Meanwhile, Bert, who has no partner and prefers to drink, starts wandering alone in the forest with his rifle. However, as he goes deeper into the forest, Bert accidentally shoots the reclusive man from the beginning of the film, clearly panicking when realizing that the man has been infected with a visibly severe condition, and he runs away. Upon returning to the cabin, Bert says nothing about the incident to his friends. Later that evening, as the group gathers around the campfire, suddenly a stranger named Grim, along with his dog named Dr. Mambo, joins them unashamedly, spoiling their reputation. But he is accepted by the others when they learn that he has brought a lot of marijuana. Their conversation is finally interrupted when it starts to rain, and Grim returns to his tent with his beloved dog. At night, when the group gathers in the living room, the infected reclusive man comes to the cabin seeking help, but Bert quickly slams the door in his face. The desperate man then tries to steal their vehicle, leading to a conflict between him and the 5 teenagers, during which they accidentally disable their car and end up burning the man. He then ran into the forest, perhaps to death. After the incident, the group began to reflect on their mistakes, but believed they were right as they were in a defensive position. They then started to worry about the dire state of the solitary man, while considering how they could get home. The next day, necessarily, they had to split up to seek help, where Jeff and Bert went together, while Marcy went alone by rowing a boat, whereas Karen, still in shock, was soothed by Paul, who then gave her water directly from the lake. On their way, they eventually met a farmer who was furious. After sharing their problems, the farmer's wife offered to help them and appeared very kind to them both. However, they hurriedly left when they found out that the solitary man was the nephew of the woman named Henry. Meanwhile, Deputy Winston finally arrived at the cabin to investigate a disturbance report from the previous night. Paul explained a lot without mentioning the suspected death of the solitary man Henry. After receiving Paul's report, Winston promised to send a tow truck before leaving. Later, the dog named Dr. Mambo suddenly returned to the cabin without Grim and seemed to have been infected. The dog then threatened Paul and Bert as they were cleaning their car. Luckily, Marcy arrived quickly and scared it away with gunshots. Then, after their conversation about seeking help, even as the intimacy approached, they discovered that Karen was now infected with the flesh-eating virus, and her legs started rotting from where Paul had touched it earlier. Suddenly, although shocked and causing everyone to panic after seeing Karen's condition, Bert then ordered the others to stay away and forced Karen to stay in the room, where she then rampaged because she was not helped. After that event, fearing contamination, Marcy ordered everyone to strip to check if they were infected, until Karen appeared very different, and they finally decided to lock her in the shed. Paul then decided to go on foot to seek help. The only person he met chased him, mistaking him for a spy. Afterward, debates arose among them again due to fear of the virus, until Paul finally silenced everyone who had to cooperate to solve their problems. They were then instructed by the arrival of the dog barking at the shed where Karen was. They then checked on her but quickly returned, after realizing that Karen did not respond, assuming she was all right. The next morning, they hurried to leave, where they saw Karen's condition was very severe. then guided her to the car without the others knowing that Bert was also infected. However, he remained silent without telling the others. Yet the group's attempt to evacuate ultimately failed when Karen vomited blood all over the inside of the car. Jeff then began to speculate that Bert had been infected. Bert immediately drove back to the grocery store alone, while Jeff, being selfish, then left everyone and fled to a secluded shack. Due to their slim chances of survival, they became pessimistic. Marcy and Paul regretted their poor chances of survival and eventually decided to have sex, believing they wouldn't live long enough to regret it. In the enjoyment of their intimacy, they then discovered a mark on Marcy's back, revealing that she too was sick and infected. Meanwhile, Bert had arrived at the grocery store, then forced Tommy to call them a doctor. However, when left alone, his son Dennis, who considered everyone as food, then bit Bert's hand as he had done to Paul before. Clearly afterwards, Tommy condemned Bert for getting his son infected, and he and his friends then planned to chase Bert to kill him to prevent him from spreading the disease further. Meanwhile, Paul, deeply in love with Karen, went back to the shed to see her in a severely disheveled condition. He then decided to seek help again, where he encountered Henry, the man severely burned at the lake, who strangely was still alive, and brutally attacked Paul only for Paul to defend himself and ultimately kill him. Afterward, Paul realized that they were infected because they had drunk water from the contaminated lake. Meanwhile, Marcy bathed, and when shaving her legs, the infected flesh peeled off her body, clearly driving her to despair, so she stumbled outside in distress and was eventually mauled to death by the dog, Dr. Mambo, mutilated to death. Later, Paul returned to the shed after seeing pieces of Marcy's hand lying in front of the cabin, and he heard Karen calling for help. Seeing her hand being mauled by the dog, Karen pleaded with him to kill her because she could no longer endure her suffering. However, when he agreed, his gun was empty, so reluctantly, Paul decapitated Karen's face with a shovel. But because she wouldn't die, Paul doused Karen with gasoline, then burned the shed, watching in pain as Karen truly burned alive. After that, Bert managed to return to the cabin, but he was followed and shot dead by Tommy, cracking his head open, and this was witnessed directly by Paul. Paul quickly recovered Bert's rifle and shot Tommy and two of Tommy's associates dead. Afterwards, Paul fled with Tommy's truck, but crashed it into a tree and exploded, because he could no longer withstand the infection that was eating away at his body. Now bloodied, Paul found a small bonfire party attended by Deputy Winston, who at that moment received a radio call from the sheriff, ordering her to shoot Paul on the spot. However, before he was shot dead, Paul managed to convince Winston to let him go, and Winston agreed, knowing that Paul was surely going to die. Back at the cabin, where Jeff then found the bodies of his friends and Tommy's associates. Strangely, he was joyful for having survived the ordeal himself until he saw signs of infection on his hand, and was unexpectedly shot and killed by Deputy Winston with a sniper rifle, believing he was infected. Meanwhile, Paul eventually died from the infection and died in the forest, where Dennis later found his body. Back at the cabin, as authorities cleaned up the scene, it was revealed that Jeff's body lay near the lake, which had now become an infected area, and the film ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.